Dear friends, a very good afternoon to every one of you. And friends, it's an absolute privilege to sit with Father Felix Wilfred, one of the leading theologians of Asia, and who has a very good rapport with the Vatican functioning and Vatican personnels, including Holy Father Pope Francis. I'm so glad to sit with Father Felix to put across a few questions, very pointed questions, brief questions, and we expect not politically right questions, answers. Professor Felix is outspoken, and he doesn't give politically correct questions. He speaks his heart out. So without much ado, I would like to place the first question to Father Felix. Professor Felix, you track Pope Francis quite closely. You also are familiar with the nitty-gritties of the Vatican. What, in your view, is the trajectory of mission for the Holy See today? And a small leading question, where does missiology stand in the scheme of things for the Vatican, for the Holy See?
I think with the arrival of Pope Francis, there has taken place quite remarkable reform in the Roman Curia. You know that in the time of Cardinal Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith was the most eminent. Next to the Pope, it was all in all, that was the congregation. But now Pope Francis has realized that you don't do the mission of the gospel by orthodoxy, by checking whether what you say is right or not. The policeman's job, So, first reform he has done, Predicate Evangelium, that's the reform of the Roman Curia, downsize and downgrade this congregation, which is a right one. It's no more the congregation which it was before, like a policing, the people, which did not allow. How many theologians were silenced? How much of new theological impulses in Asia were stunted? How Balasurya was excommunicated? So all this because of a distorted approach to the gospel. That gospel is not orthodoxy, orthopraxis. Therefore, rightly he has downgraded it, and he has appointed a very, very brilliant Cardinal Navas, and has given the mandate to promote theology. That's the congregation's duty, not to play the watchdog, So now, interestingly, the contrasting is that he has made mission as the most important dicastery in Vatican. So very clearly you see that the mission is first and foremost congregation dicastery in Vatican is the Congregation for Mission, which was earlier known as Congregation for the Propagation of Faith, Propaganda Fide. But now he has made two arms in that because the whole idea of mission has changed dramatically after Vatican, now the change in the world. So you cannot go ahead only with a territorial, colonial understanding of mission, certain territories in Africa, in Asia, all those people, who are there. This kind of, the territory-based understanding of mission, he has said, no, we have to have different understanding. That he at the same time sees mission as a totality, as a whole. Even the West, that 1948, I think there was Henry, there was a French priest, Godin, France, le pays de mission, with a question mark. Is France a country of mission? It was a scandal in Europe, Europe is a place where the missionaries go. You are now raising France is a country of mission. It made waves, Now every country is a mission. That's practically, in mission. Wherever. All the churches are in mission. And particularly in the West, Because unfortunately, no time now to explain too much, the West is characterized not so much today by secularization. That was the character through which West was interpreted. Religion, so we don't need religion is put in its place. No, it is the nihilism. Nihilism. Nihilism means I don't believe in anything. This life is over. You're born, you vegetate and then be happy, and then that's it. So increasingly, people in the West, America and Europe, believe in the nihilism. There's nothing. So there are no values, no God. This is a major. So there's a crisis of God. Therefore, this situation must be addressed. Therefore, it's not enough to fight secularism like Ratzinger did. We have to go more radically. This whole culture of nihilism. Therefore, Pope is addressing by establishing a new arm within this congregation, saying that the other countries which were earlier Christian, the culture, those countries with focus and the fundamental questions on, on mission and evangelization. So there are two pro-prefects, one is a Filipino for the congregation for this one, which is a traditional mission, this two congregation. And I think, and he gives a lot of, and Pope himself, the only congregation, dicastery, where the Pope is the head, is the congregation for mission. So you understand the importance Pope Francis gives, and because the wider vision of understanding of Pope Francis cannot be reduced to a simple, way of what it was happening earlier.
And Professor Felix, as a missiology as a discipline, where does that figure in the scheme of things?
Yeah. You know that missiology is, in theology, a relatively new discipline. St. Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure never had a missiology or anything, So it was after the Reformation. Actually, there was mission in the medieval times, the Capuchins and the Dominicans and all went, that time. So a systematic, the religious congregations were doing that, but it was a little bit scattered. Some Franciscans go here, some. So Rome wanted, some kind of coordination. So they created in 1622 the congregation for our mission, But the purpose, you should know, interestingly, the original purpose of the mission congregation was not so much to preach gospel to India or Africa or anything, to win back the Catholics who became Protestants. Therefore, the England was under the propaganda fide because they were the Anglicans, So all the countries, even America, even Australia, were till quite recently, America became out of the mission congregation only beginning of the 20th century, to say. That was the original. So there was a kind of organized mission happened, with that. So with that, what happened was, initially it was left to the enthusiasm of the individuals, the congregations to do. But they thought, well, you go to different places, now you must know, how these people are, what's happening, how the Nagas are, or the Mizos are, whatever it is, Africans. So a kind of preparing the missionaries to go so that they know, So it's kind of, I would say, kind of ecclesiastical Orientalism. As the British colonial rule or French colonial rule, they studied the people whom they ruled over in order to govern them better. Therefore, census, all kind of thing introducing. Similarly, also they said they must be trained a little bit. So the missiology is a relatively new discipline which came into existence, preparing. So anthropology became important, something about culture, all those things. But I think today we are in a completely different situation with this vision which we heard, from the many inputs, and from yesterday, all that we hear is a much larger issue than a tiny part or an appendix to theological disciplines. The mission becomes a central discipline for integrating all the others. So we need to know Christ from the perspective of what does that mean in terms of the people, who is Jesus Christ, for us. Yes.
My next question is exactly coming to that, which is also my personal experience. We see a kind of discontent
Yeah.
among the Indian missiologists,
Right.
especially, and old world over also, that there is a feeling that you don't need specialization for mission, and missiology is only an appendix in the larger discipline in the church.
Yes.
We see it, and you have experienced it also.
Right. If you continue in the same old way missiology, you are right. It's a marginal discipline. No, you give them a little bit of informations, all that marginal. But if you have a completely new vision about mission, the missiology needs to reimagine itself. It needs to become more and more a political theology, a theology of the culture, only much more than, a prophetic theology, So I think the problem is not with missiology, the question of missiology, but how it is. It is understood and interpreted, So it could be really a central discipline in as much as it integrates all other disciplines. Therefore, just to quote Karl Rahner's original to us, that he introduced the transcendental method, Instead of simply speaking about doctrines, etc., he said, what are the a priori conditions for a human being to understand a particular dogma? Which was something very original, because there was a, intersection between human aspiration and the faith doctrine. So it met. Therefore, it attracted universal attention. Because Rahner said, this is the meaning. The anthropological. Therefore, anthropology and theology became interchangeable. Similarly, we need to interpret all the traditional disciplines in the light of mission. What does that mean? Not simply perichoresis, all kind of things. So we translate it into what is communion, fraternity. So what you speak about Trinity, perichoresis becomes very important of all the things we spoke about, fraternity. So the Trinity is brought in relation to fraternity. So therefore the mission becomes an interpretative discipline which brings together.
Thank you. My next question is in the backdrop of what we discussed this morning. Now, Pope Francis makes every effort to live, in his own words, the different nuances of Vatican II. But there is a lot of mounting pressure in the Vatican. Recently we saw in America, in the District of Texas, one bishop was defrocked. Now, do you see such brewing pressure also in the church leadership, especially among the theologians, among the canonists in India, especially in line with his thought on interreligious dialogue, accommodating different castes, cultures, traditions? Do you see a kind of a resistance?
What I would distinguish to, West and what's happening in India, a little bit for discussion, make it more sharp, The West, of course, not all, but the Euro-American frame of Christianity is being broken by this man who defined himself as someone who comes from the ends of the earth, someone from the south, It's a big challenge. He is a white man, but still his whole experience, everything is from the south. He was born and brought. So he's bringing the new energies from the south, and there is resistance. Bishop Schneider, I think, from Azerbaijan, I read an interview where he says, it is, heretical to say church is synodal. A bishop is telling. Now you know that what happened in Texas, Pope has, suspended, So there is a lot of resistance to this approach of Pope Francis in the name of, the whole question of dubia, the four cardinals, trap him, under doctrinal, almost like you are reminded about the Pharisees trapping Jesus, asking is it right to, like that same kind of attitude. They are not satisfied. Pope tried to answer now.
He's accused of tampering with the deposit of faith and the theological tenets.
That's right. And there are people who even question the validity of his election.
Yes.
So, yes. And yes, there are the question whether it's validity. And they are asking how to depose a heretical pope. They are discussing. Can you imagine, no? Yes. And they are praying for his natural solution of death as early as possible, And the Roman Curia, I heard, they are telling about, because they are insecure. Because the Roman Curia, these people they're sitting 20, 30 years doing their career. Suddenly Pope Francis says there is a term of office, 5 years. Finished, the collapse. I'm not saying everybody, but Pope has repeatedly critiqued the Curia more than anybody else because he sees every day, So they say this Pope Francis is like, in the Old Testament, then came a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. So they don't understand what's happening. So there is a strong resistance to Pope Francis within the Curia, around his thing. But one good thing, as Leonard Boff said, one good thing is that you cannot poison this Pope. He said, what is that? Because Pope eat normally alone, This Pope he stands in queue and then, it's difficult to poison. Now coming to India, you don't find that kind of, opposition,
Correct.
Tooth and nail, but rather apathy. I am asking, I know from childhood how the bishops and priests used to quote Pope repeatedly, popes. As long as it strengthened their power, Pope is very good. But now you hardly hear bishops and priests speaking about Pope and what he's telling. Because it is uncomfortable. Because the restraint on power, that's the whole meaning of synodality. And I'm happy, and somebody referred to the synthesis, I think elaborately, I think Father Sekar, where it comes, I have written about an article, you can read it, it's online, where it says that this is one of the very important, so I said it's a hopeful synthesis because there's hope. It has come to the canonical point because there is a canonical and legal flaw as a system is that the three powers are concentrated in one office. That means, that legislative, executive and judiciary, which cannot be accepted as a legal means. Law is to protect justice, Therefore, you are both the one who makes the law, one who judges, and the all the three. It's not possible. Now, the synod, synthesis is one of the very, sign of hope, is that it has brought out that there must be assessment, evaluation of the various ministers. That means tomorrow we'll have a system where every bishop will be evaluated. How he performs. And I've written in the article, not only that, the Roman Curia must be also evaluated. And the nuncios must also be evaluated. Because they are service organization. We are all human beings, But I would say that this kind of thing, which Pope is. So coming back to your basic question, there is the West, the open resistance. Here, not, enthusiasm, maybe some, there are. But on the whole, it's not being absorbed and put into practice.
Some apathy and inertia.
Apathy.
As you said, it is one of my grouses also that at the highest level in our leadership, there are no checks and balances that we have even in a democratic, dictatorial countries. I think that's what synodality also aims at.
Yeah.
My next question is very much to our reality. Now, we live in a society where mission is resisted from all fronts in India, as Bishop Dabre beautifully expressed. The question is, we hardly have nuanced, straightforward response from the leadership. How the mission must happen in a context like this, volatile and angry, we have no blueprint.
Exactly, very right question. Your right observation. This is what's happening. Because we are running on the old steam.
Correct.
As they say, the usual image, you
Correct.
put a cycle in the stand and then go on and on pedaling, imagining that you are reaching miles and miles. You are standing there, So with all our institutions, we are only doing the cycling, in the stand. It goes on, the engine goes on and on. Now the breakthrough in response to what's happening all around. It's only, nothing moves because of the strong institutionalization, etc., etc. Now the point is there has taken place a change. Once with the educational institution, the health, etc., etc., Christians were seen as the benefactors of the society. I mean, well-meaning people in India would recognize, Of course, now with this radical right wing, it's a different thing, they will recognize. But then there are others who are competing, So that it's too well known, schools, colleges, hospitals, they are first class, all those things. So from being benefactors to the society with our institutions, we have become competitors. That's not what is needed. We must have alternatives. Not to another, where you have a train for NEET and all that, the prime excellence. No, there are so many people, the private corporates are doing much better. They have a lot more money, We are run still with the old names, brand names, Loyola and, Xavier's, all kinds of brand names, still it sells, But basically, we require a new avenues, new avenues of mission. And finding out, discovery. Via leadership, everybody must cooperate, And therefore, there is a lot more thinking to be done. Your question is very right, So we are all going with the old steam. There is what is in this political, in this economic and cultural transformation which has taken in the last couple of decades. Where do you go? So this is a question which all of us should address.
And just adding to that, the public sphere, for example, interreligious dialogue, for example, intercultural rapport, for example, is never part of our strong mission so far. No, it's only little humanitarian works and education, and these have not come into the center stage for our mission. Maybe that's right. Maybe the last question, Professor Felix, something to do with us missiologists. Your love and romance with missiology is undebatable. No, the Panikars and the Amaldases and the Painadats and the Felixes are a rare commodity. We don't have the missiological enthusiasm that we had after the Vatican II. And you all came after the Vatican II, became leading Asian theologians, Professor Amaldas, Felix Wilfred, Painadat, and many, many others, which is a rare commodity today. Can you address this issue? How will you tickle that missiological venture in us and cultivating that strong Asian theological thought for the church?
I think the sense of mission for Asia and India is very, very challenging one. In the sense, it is quintessentially speaking truth to power. This is it. This is a great challenge at all levels. Speaking truth to power. This is because we have heavy luggage, Churches sometimes like the old lady, sorry, not lady or gentleman, whoever it is, standing at the bus stand, with a lot of luggage, And the bus comes, by the time she gets in, the bus goes, with all the luggage, because we don't want to leave anything. So churches like that, want to keep everything, but even the last bus goes, it stands in the night, dark. So this should not happen. So this is the quintessential challenge is, are we speaking truth to power? And especially now, the last few years, we know what's happening. I will just illustrate with one case, where the people of God should come forward to help the leaders, the bishops, the priests, to play this role. So don't expect, from them, because the establishment has its own logic. It won't. But the people must steer them, to do that. I will give an example and finish. In 1986, 85, 86, there was, that time, more than 2 decades, there was Marcos was a dictator, big dictator in the Philippines. And I used to go to teach, every year, East Asian Pastor Institute, etc. So every time I go, there was a coup after that, what happened afterwards, Sin was a very prominent church leader, Cardinal Sin, and he was very close to Marcos, was a dictator, Imelda Marcos, his wife. And people are very angry because people were killed. Non-judicial, extrajudicial killing, all these things were human rights violation, everything happening. And will the church speak? Will the cardinal speak? Will the bishop speak? Nothing happened. And I was there, I witnessed that, that on the birthday of Marcos, Cardinal was on the stage and wished, cut the cake and embraced Marcos. Such a huge scandal. People are dying. This leader of the church, who should speak truth to power, is embracing. You know what he said? He's a little humorous, but it's a way of escaping with humor. I must love my enemies. Can you see? So there are very nuanced way of escapism. We must build bridges with the government. We must do all kinds of, that means he's escaping. But that's why the second part of the story, the same Cardinal Sin, when momentum built up from the bottom, people's power, they're all on the street, a huge crowd, millions resisted. And slowly the man woke up. And last minute he joined, And then he resisted, because even Vatican, I heard, sent, through the nuncio to support Marcos. It's unfortunate. And Cardinal was. The people who dragged practically the Cardinal to resist Marcos, and it worked, because the church has so much power, and this man had, especially in a country where almost 80-85%, 90% are Catholics, and he became suddenly leader, At least the last part of the revolution he led because of the whole power of the people which came. In a minor way, we can say something similar to Oscar Romero, who was basically a conservative person, but the experiences he saw around converted him, You know the story, the whole film also is there.
Yeah.
That's what, therefore I would say not expect, from them, there must be the swell of, So therefore synodality helps also in that sense to play the prophetic role, because the people are involved, when the preparation for the synod came, one diocese, I couldn't go, I was addressing online. There were 500 lay people were there. Hardly 15 priests from the diocese were there. Not interested. That. But the people are so enthusiastic. So I think we need to, bring together, pull together the faith of the people, sensus fidelium, whatever it is, the enthusiasm. People are ready. So this is for the conversion and change of clergy. I think this is one way too. So ultimately, in one sentence, repeat again, speak truth to power. This is a challenge to the Indian church.
This is also my humble submission that whenever people rose up to speak truth to the power, leaders were born. Right. And also in the church, theologians were born, like in the liberation theologians. Right. Yeah. And just concluding with what you said, our own Holy Father Pope Francis says, today in India and across the board, we need religious leaders, priests, nuns, religious leaders prophets who can raise dust, who can ruffle feathers. Sometime you may have to bear the brunt, as our Holy Father Pope Francis says.
Exactly.
So, Father Professor Felix, it's absolutely pleasure, a thrill talking to you. And in a conversation like this, the best comes out rather than presenting a paper, and you always speak truth to the power. And it's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.